Hello and welcome to MEE Live. I'm Matilda Mallinson. It's Thursday, the 19th of March, 2026. We're continuing our daily live coverage of the US-Israeli war on Iran. Today, what is President Trump thinking? Is President Trump losing his grip? As his ill-defined war on Iran escalates, core MAGA supporters are defecting.
Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation. So the imminent threat that the Secretary of State is describing is not from Iran, it's from Israel.
Exactly. And I think this speaks to the broader issue. Who is in charge of our policy in the Middle East?
There's not a person under the age of 40 who's a voting Republican who's in favor of this.
It just seems so insane based on what he ran on.
MAGA is dead. It is deader than dead, and Americans are furious.
Allies are no longer fazed by the president's insults.
You know who that is? Churchill. That's the late, great Winston Churchill. And when I came in, I was asked if I wanted it. I said, absolutely, I want it. And I put it right there, Winston Churchill. And, you know, unfortunately, Keir is not Winston Churchill.
My principles have been clear and unwavering. We will protect our people in the region. We will take action to defend ourselves and our allies. And we will not be drawn into the wider war.
He's blackmailing the media to report more patriotically.
Donald Trump also taking aim at news coverage of the war in the United States. Now the head of the broadcast regulator in the U.S. has come out with a threat. Brendan Carr, a Trump ally, who now says he will revoke the licenses of U.S. broadcasters over their war coverage.
I actually think it's pretty criminal because our media companies, who have no credibility whatsoever, are putting out information that they know is false.
And he appears to be having imaginary conversations with a former president.
I've spoken to a certain president, who I like, actually, a past president, former president. He said, I wish I did it. I wish I did, but they didn't do it. I'm doing it, yeah.
Which president?
I can't tell you that.
Unless the president was hallucinating a conversation with one of the many dead presidents, there are only 4 living presidents who could have possibly said that, and all 4 are saying, not me.
It's confusing, and in the midst of war, confusing is concerning. But we have someone here to help. Carla Sands was the U.S. ambassador to Denmark during Trump's first term and is now senior fellow at the America First Policy Institute. Carla, you worked closely alongside Trump on foreign policy. We're hoping you can take us inside his mind. We're almost 3 weeks into this war. The past 24 hours have seen a dramatic escalation. Oil and gas prices are soaring. Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed. MAGA is divided. Allies are distanced. Tell us, at this point, what is President Trump thinking?
Well, first of all, Matilda, thank you for having me. MAGA is not divided. 100% of Republicans support President Trump, 100%. So that's extraordinary and unheard of. It's because of his great policies. But President Trump is also saying that as soon as this Iran war issue is settled, that the cost of gas and energy is going to come down and go down below what it was before. And that's good news. But he's also warning Iran and Israel, do not attack energy infrastructure. Do not attack civilian infrastructure. Iran attacked in Qatar, and Israel attacked in Iran. And he wants to keep civilian infrastructure in place, both in the Gulf, but also for the people of Iran, so that they have civilization when this war ends, and
Carla,
so that their economy can thrive.
You said 100% of Republicans support Trump. Certainly about 70 to 80% did say that they approved of this. Overall, though, among Americans, this war is the most unpopular a war has been when it started. Do all Americans not matter when it comes to the waging of war?
You know, it's a fair question, Matilda, but as a matter of fact, President Trump has done a bold thing, not a political expedient thing, but it's something that every American president has talked about and has punted. When I was at the Bush White House toward the end of George Bush's term. I asked his head of security, are you going to use those bunker buster bombs and take out Iran's early nuclear enrichment so that they're not a threat to us? They've been saying death to America for 47 years. And you know what he said? No, we're going to leave it for the next team to take care of. So that's what happened on both sides of the aisle. Finally, President Trump, even though the midterms are coming up, he's saying this is the right thing because Iran working with Russia and China and having more and more capable ballistic missiles is going to stop those long-range ballistic missiles and also end their desire to have nuclear weapons and be a threat not just to the region, but hold the world hostage. They're an existential threat to civilization.
But there has been contradictory intel on that front, most recently from Joe Kent, who we saw resign as director of the Counterterrorism Center. And not just Joe Kent, although he was very, very clear when he said that there is no intelligence to show that Iran is an imminent threat to the US. Tulsi Gabbard herself made sort of divided statements, and in a written statement, she said that there wasn't an imminent threat. So how are we supposed to react to hearing this coming from inside Trump's own government, Trump's own intelligence bodies? How are we supposed to process that information when it directly contradicts what the president is giving as his justification for war?
Well, President Trump will be getting more fulsome information than someone like Joe Kent was getting. He gets the best information in the world. But when it comes to imminent threat, let's talk about how the embassies of the Iranians were used to house kill groups. They had a fatwa on President Trump and attempted to assassinate him. They've killed hundreds of American servicemen and women, and they've injured thousands. And this is a regime that is a threat. It's a threat to the Gulf, but it's a threat to the world. And so President Trump, I'm looking at what he's doing to secure the people of the United States and also secure that energy. He's going to give opportunity to the Iranian people, which they haven't had for 47 years. They've lived under this murderous dictatorship. In fact, there are cells within Iran that are fighting back, boots on the ground, from the NCRI, and they are working to create a democracy in Iran. They have a 10-point plan. They want freedom of the sexes, equality, religion, freedom of religion, equality for minorities.
One democratic revolution and democratic change is one thing.
Yes.
Democratic transition of power is one thing. So a democratic transition of power would be one thing in Iran. And you mentioned that there is a fatwa out on Trump's life. However, the US has actually assassinated the supreme leader of Iran in a manner that is widely seen to be against international law. If, as you say, the justifications for law are all perfectly in line, why not go to Congress? Why not go to the UN Security Council and attempt to pursue this war through the legal means?
Well, President Trump has the legal authority to do what he's doing. That's an unconstitutional idea that Congress controls the president's activity in a war. But as far as the UN, we can see that it's controlled largely by China and by adversaries. It's not delivering on the purpose that it was built for, which was for peace. We have very, very bad actors that are, in some cases, have key leadership positions at the UN. In fact, President Trump created the Board of Peace under the umbrella of the UN to actually execute peace throughout the world, including in the Middle East with Gaza and Israel.
And Carla, you have a hard out in 1 minute, but just quickly, you were the ambassador, you were a diplomat in Denmark, right? In Trump's first presidency. So I have to get your thoughts on his language. Yes. You know, as this war in Iran is going on, he's talking about taking Cuba. He also talked about taking Greenland. And I wonder what you make of this and whether taking or talk of taking is a good diplomatic strategy.
Well, President Trump is working to secure the Western Hemisphere. For decades, presidents, leaders in the United States have ignored our own backyard. And so you can see he's working to kick out Iran, Russia, and China from Venezuela. We've reestablished diplomatic ties with Venezuela just in the past week. We're working with them on energy to grow their economy. We got rid of the narco-terrorist Maduro. He's going to stand trial in the United States. But he's also looking at Cuba, which has been a hotbed for Russia and China. China has an intelligence post there in Cuba under the communist boot of the murderous Castro regime. So good things are happening in our hemisphere. Greenland's not secure because Denmark, a small country, good friends, but when they say they have sovereignty, you have sovereignty when you can defend your territory. They have no hope of defending Greenland, and neither do the NATO nations, because we can see they don't have capabilities to even defend their own territory without the United States. President Trump is pressing those NATO allies to actually have capability to defend their own territory, to have the capability with arms, with manpower, and with the economic might, because they're slipping. They're not growing like, say, the Middle East or Asia is. So he's encouraging them to do better. And President Trump is working to bring peace throughout the world. He's ended a lot of conflicts and wars just during his a little over 1 year in office. So I'm excited to see what comes in the next few years and how we're all going to have more peace and prosperity. Thanks for having me, Matilda.
Carla Sands, Senior Fellow at the America First Policy Institute. Thank you for your time. Now, not everyone is sold. Arguably, the most significant defection from Trump's power base over this war came on Tuesday when Director of National Counterterrorism Center Joe Kent resigned. I cannot, in good conscience, support the ongoing war in Iran. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation, and it is clear that we started this war due to pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby. Kent's resignation letter sent shockwaves across US media, but the president himself dismissed it. So does it make any difference? During Israel's war on Gaza, Josh Poole became the first US official to resign in protest. As a State Department official, he worked on arms deals until his resignation in 2023. Now he's co-founder of a new policy. He joins us now. Josh, did your resignation make a difference? And will Joe Kent's resignation make a difference?
I think the challenge we face in America when it comes to US policy towards Israel is fundamentally a political one. And the American political system takes time to shift. It moves in increments of 2 years at a time, the midterms and then the general elections. And so I think the answer is yes. America is shifting, and voices like Joe Kent's, voices like the over 15 of us who resigned publicly from the Biden administration, I think have very much been driving a debate that you see more vividly on the Democratic side of the aisle, but that, as Kent's resignation shows, is also very much bubbling up on the Republican side. And while it will unfortunately take much more time than it should, I think it is very clear that the American people's perspective is shifting, and that American policy has to follow it.
If you were in government now, would you see the war on Iran as a resigning matter, as you did the war on Gaza?
So I don't know that you can separate out the two. I think they are part of a continuum which involves Israel's actions in the broader Middle East towards certainly the Palestinian population, but also, towards Iran, towards other countries that are surrounding it. And I think, even now the Gulf countries have to be looking over their shoulder and wondering, once this is through, who is next? The problem you really have fundamentally, whether you're talking about Gaza, Lebanon, or Iran, is that you don't have a partner for peace. Ironically, that partner that is not there to make peace with the region, with the countries around it, is Israel. And that's the fundamental problem, whichever part of this equation you're looking at.
So just to pin down how this actually works, I want to zoom in on a specific line in Joe Kent's letter, which explains why he thinks this war all began. Addressing Trump directly, Joe Kent said high-ranking Israeli officials and influential members of the American media deployed a misinformation campaign, and that this echo chamber was used to deceive you, aka Trump, into believing Iran posed an imminent threat. I just wonder if you can give us any insight from your personal experience in the State Department. Where does the president get his information? Do you think Trump understands what's going on, or has he been deceived?
So I'm obviously not party to the president's daily intelligence briefings now. I do think that my own experience suggests that there is a bubble, and it is one in which I think generations of American policymakers and politicians have essentially been conditioned through a series of very powerful, effective political incentive and disincentive structures, reward and punishment system, if you will, to think within a box. And that box is, where is Israel? What does Israel want us to do? And I think it is very difficult for people to break out of that. Again, whether it's because it's how they've thought for most of their careers, or whether because they are afraid of the consequences for doing so. I do suspect that there are some voices in the administration, even now that Kent is out, who are speaking up, who are trying to nudge the president in a different direction. I think his own experience of this conflict and how it now seems to be going will certainly be weighing on him in some respect. But at the same time, there is a very organized and powerful consensus around him. And I'm thinking of people here like Secretary of State Rubio, Stephen Miller and James Blair in the White House, and others who will be essentially trying to make the president work with blinders on.
Wow, and you've made a case that Israel really strongly influences America's foreign policy in a military capacity. Certainly, the US spends billions annually on Israeli military defenses, stockpiles of military provisions literally depleted for this purpose. Do you think that it hampers America's ability to defend itself, the amount that it invests in defending, or not just defending Israel, but actually enabling Israel to act in an offensive capacity as well?
It is having a very deleterious effect on America's global leadership, and I think that is very concerning.
Something else that is concerning, particularly from a journalist's perspective, is that Trump and the Federal Communications Commission have threatened to revoke news outlets' licenses if they don't comply more with the president's narrative. Do you think that this will influence US news coverage and the information that the American people are getting?
So this administration has been using a variety of tools to try and get the coverage that it wants, whether that is excluding credible media outlets from White House or Pentagon briefings, whether that is, supporting the takeover in some cases of networks and, putting people in place who have a pro-administration perspective. I think that should be deeply concerning for all Americans. Whether or not it is effective, we will yet to see. That is playing out right now, both through the mainstream media and also in terms of where most Americans get their news these days, which is social media. But it does not hearken well. And at the end of the day, I think the administration, if it's concerned about its coverage, should be concerned about the policies and the actions that it is taking that are leading to that bad coverage.
Josh Paul, co-founder of A New Policy, thank you so much for joining MEE Live today. Part of Iran's strategy has been to try and make American citizens feel the blow of their president's war by sending oil and gas prices soaring. And MEE's US reporter Munira El-Samra says they're starting to feel the pain at the pump. But is it swaying support?
The war with Iran is costing the American taxpayer over $1 billion a day. Gas prices in the US are soaring. Americans who are already suffering from the affordability crisis are now feeling the pain at the pump. Gas prices have gone up $1 from where they were a month ago, and oil prices have gone from $65 a barrel to over $108 a barrel. With no clear end to this war in sight, we're here in New York to ask the city, do you support this war with Iran? Are you in favor of U.S. war with Iran?
Absolutely not.
I am against any war happening anywhere in the world.
No, I do not.
Absolutely not.
No, I don't support any wars.
From what I know, probably not, no.
I feel like it's not U.S.'s place to fight this war. I think people of Iran need to decide what they need to have in terms of their government and freedom. It's not our war to fight.
I think there's no clear messaging as to why it's happening. People changing their minds up about what they're trying to achieve. I don't think U.S. and Israel necessarily has a good record in the Middle East. I don't think they actually want to liberate the people of Iran. If that's the messaging, then you can make that argument.
I think it's part of the U.S.'s global imperialist project to secure more resources and make sure its relationship with Israel stays intact.
They bombed the girls' school, even though it was next to I'm pretty sure a military camp or something. But regardless, the fact that there could be casualties should, be avoided at all costs.
On the streets of downtown New York, our reporter Munira El-Samra couldn't find a single voice in favour of the Iran war. This likely reflects the city's strong Democrat lean. But across Americans, support for the war is still a minority view. YouGov polling after the initial attacks showed 48% disapproved, while 37% approved. There is a Republican-Democrat divide, but more Democrats strongly disapprove than Republicans strongly approve. It is the most unpopular a US war has ever been when it started. So some are asking, why has there been so little collective protest? Rachel Cohen is an activist, community organizer, and former big law attorney who resigned in protest to the industry's capitulation to the Trump administration. She went viral for documenting ICE raids and protests. Now she's pushing for a new act of civil disobedience. Rachel, why aren't you paying your taxes?
I decided to withhold federal income tax and retain the amount owed in a high yield savings account based on the United States' build out of ICE, which is a secret police disappearing people off of our streets. And in the 3 days in between when I made that decision and when I announced it, we started bombing Iran. So there's a number of different reasons why I'm withholding my federal income tax. On a high level, it's because I think Americans need to be thinking very seriously about forms of civil disobedience that they're willing to engage in as our government commits human rights abuses at home and abroad.
Look, as a trained attorney, I'm sure you're aware of the possible legal ramifications of not paying your taxes. What consequences are you prepared to face in this protest?
Whatever consequences the government would like to attempt to foist upon me. I think that in something like civil disobedience, and particularly this version of tax resistance, I'm quite well situated as someone with a lot of resilience to a number of consequences. There are not other people that are financially dependent upon me. I'm very well connected. I have a lot of career resilience. And when thinking about potential maximum consequences, whether those are monetary or even up to and including criminal charges that could result in prison time, something I thought about constantly was that the larger the consequence the government would like to bring, the larger the impact and amount of attention brought to this form of protest. And to me, that feels worth it.
How are you generally received by your fellow Americans when you tell them about this protest? Do you meet with support, with anger? People don't care? What's the response generally?
I think generally there's quite a bit of support, not just from people in the United States, but globally, because I think there's been a lot of questions about why Americans are not more actively resisting the Trump regime as it attempts to kind of build out and become ever more authoritarian with massive impacts for people at home and abroad. In terms of US response, I think that many people are grateful for someone who's willing to kind of walk through step by step their experience with this process, though I'm not calling other people to do it. I think it's an incredibly personal decision. I think that the biggest critiques that I've received tends to really misunderstand the point of tax resistance and civil disobedience broadly. And there are kind of two versions of that criticism that come together very similarly. One comes from people who are on the center left in the United States, which of course is the center right globally. And it's a notion that failing to pay your taxes actually negatively impacts the welfare state to the extent that we have a welfare state in the United States of America. And that it would be bad for things like Social Security if everyone in the country stopped paying their taxes over protests related to ICE and war. The second is that ultimately, through fees and fines and government garnishing bank accounts, you may end up paying more to the government if you engage in tax protest. And I think that both of those criticisms show just how stuck in their current understanding of the world most Americans are, by which I mean people who are making those criticisms cannot imagine a broader contextual change in the United States of America. And in saying, but if millions of people stopped paying their taxes, the welfare state would collapse, it shows just how limited our imagination is. Because the idea that millions of Americans would stop paying their income tax and the federal government's biggest concern would be what to cut in the budget as opposed to how to handle what is functionally an outright peaceful rebellion of federal authority, it's nonsensical. The point of civil disobedience and the point of tax resistance is to make people think about the power that we hold and the way that we consent to our government's actions by passively participating in the kinds of legal structures that the government puts forward and needs in order to carry out its work, not because they need my individual income tax, but because they need Americans to go along with what they're doing and fail to realize that we don't actually have to do that.
Now, you pointed to a peculiarity at the beginning of your answer there, which is why isn't there so much coordinated protest against the many things that Donald Trump has been inflicting on the American population? Certainly, this war was the least popular, according to polling, of any US war when it began. But we haven't seen a hugely coordinated anti-war movement. Why aren't more Americans protesting the war on Iran?
I think, and I always appreciate getting to speak to this question to an international audience in particular. It's because of the lack of an American welfare state, of a lack of the kind of dismantling of unions and organized labor that we've seen in the United States over decades, the dismantling of the left that began during McCarthyism, that happened throughout anti-Vietnam protests and the civil rights movement, particularly of groups that were willing to do more kind of disruptive tactics. I think that the Panthers, for example, building out community organizations that were independent from the government because the government was neglecting Black America, that was subversive in the extreme to the United States of America. And that is why the CIA, that and racism is why the United States consistently jailed or murdered people who were prominent leaders in the Panthers. And so we've had this history of the US government crushing the organized left, not just in the United States, but globally. The United States has had its hands in the kind of violent dismantling of socialist and communist movements throughout the world since the 50s and 60s. And in the United States specifically, the lack of a social safety net, the lack of effective unemployment, the lack of socialized healthcare means that people's livelihoods are tied to their continued employment far more than is the case in similarly wealthy nations throughout the world. So we not only don't have unions to the same extent as is true in many European countries, for example, but also, in addition to having fewer labor protections, if you lose your job, you are at much higher risk of going bankrupt because of medical bills, of becoming unhoused because there is no social safety net. And private employers become able to really effectively regulate speech in the United States. We saw that after the murder of Charlie Kirk, with people that were losing their jobs over making basic observations about Charlie Kirk's views on gun rights and access to firearms. And I think that that is a big piece, as well as the corporate capture of media in the United States, which extends not just to the not vast majority, but a huge percentage of local television networks being owned by the same people, many of whom are Trump allies, but also to kind of algorithmic takeover and control of pretty much every social media platform in the United States by Trump allies, or at least people who are agnostic to his policies, who do not care about justice. And so that is by no means meant to absolve us. People in the United States should be resisting far more than they are, but they are demoralized and they are very, very afraid of consequences to livelihood, which should not justify sitting out protests about a war that is literally murdering people, but is a very different posture than we see in most similarly wealthy nations when it comes to access to protest.
That is really, really interesting. And to your point about the media, we have now seen very direct threats made to media organizations if they do not comply with the president's narrative. You point out that, economic difficulty can often be something that silences people effectively. But also when we see mass unrest, it is very often triggered by economic crisis. And part of Iran's strategy in this war definitely appears to be trying to make the American citizen feel the cost of the war in soaring gas prices and oil prices and potentially food prices as well. Are Americans starting to feel that economic impact of this war? And do you think that could be the thing that puts people out on the street or pushes people out on the street? Very different meaning.
We're certainly starting to see economic impact, and I think that it's unfortunate and quite vile that that's one of the reasons why the Trump administration has functionally taken over Venezuela as well, is to have alternative access to oil we're already seeing kind of very, very advantageous deals between the Trump administration and the Venezuelan government, supposedly about Venezuelan oil coming into the United States. And I think that the economic pressures of the Iranian kind of targeting of the global supply chain, particularly in terms of oil, is certainly fomenting anger at the Trump administration. And I think, just as an aside, I am not confident that the average person in the United States makes this connection, but I think it's worth remembering and constantly highlighting for people in the US the history of brutal sanctions that the United States has imposed on Iran that has facilitated the kind of state of government that we saw prior to US and Israeli intervention. Similar sanctions in Venezuela and Cuba, these places where the United States is itself often causing the unrest and horrific material conditions of everyday people in these countries, and then using that to justify intervention. All of that is an aside to bring back and say that I am not confident that the average person in the United States will connect increased prices specifically to the Trump administration's intervention in Iran, particularly because I think one of the strategies of the Trump administration has been to build out what is functionally a government-sponsored jobs program for people who are willing to murder people who look different from them, in terms of building out ICE, and now in necessitating increased enlistment in the US military for the sake of going to war illegally in the Middle East, in Venezuela, potentially in Cuba. And I would like to think that the economic pressures will force people to confront kind of the ineffective leadership of Donald Trump that is one of the most astonishing grifts to be pulled off in modern history.
I'm gonna have to wrap you up there, Rachel. But thank you so much for your time. Rachel Cohen, attorney turned campaigner. It's been great to have you on the show.
Thanks so much, Matilda.
And on today's show, that is all that we have time for. But before we lose you, we would love to hear from you. Please send in your thoughts and comments and questions to @MiddleEastEye on any social platform, or email meelive@middleeasteye.net. We'll be here at 5 p.m. GMT, noon in New York, every Tuesday and Thursday. See you then.